So good evening and welcome to our part 2 of our deep dive into the constellation Orion this evening. So my name's Helen Avery and I'll be here for the next, 45 minutes, an hour with you as we're talking about Orion. So last week we looked at some of the objects within Orion, the constellation, and we talked about the Greek and Roman and Egyptian tales of Orion. Today in the Northern Hemisphere, it's known as the Great Hunter, holding aloft a shield, draped with a lion's pelt and holding up a club or a sword in the other hand, and of course wearing a belt that we're all very familiar with. But this week we are going to look below the belt to Orion's sword and his feet, which of course are the top half of Orion in the Southern Hemisphere. Orion's one of those wonderful constellations, and not many of them that you get to see in both. That's why there are so many wonderful stories of Orion all around the world. So to honour this, we're going to be sharing tales, or I'm going to be sharing tales that go beyond the sort of typical traditional Northern Hemisphere stories we've heard. So we'll have some stories tonight from Tonga and Japan and Australia, New Zealand, and also some Native American stories as well. So an exciting lineup. However, we are having some weather in both Chile and the Canary Islands. We're on alpha alert in the Canary Islands tonight, so that means high humidity. So if you're looking at the all-sky cam, you'll see that it looks like a glorious night. You can see all of the stars, you can see Orion, but sadly the domes can't open because of the high humidity. And in Chile, we're facing a similar situation. So tonight, this show is brought to you by Slooh's members because I put a note up on the discussion board that we're probably going to be not looking through telescopes tonight, sadly. And has anyone taken any really wonderful pictures of any of these objects that we want to talk about tonight? And if they would share them, and they very kindly did. So we're going to be sharing sort of images this evening, maybe not live ones, but certainly ones taken through our telescopes over the past few weeks, and we'll be talking about those. So alas, winter is upon us, so we've been a bit washed out this Sunday, and we have some great things lined up, but you can go and see all of those still through the telescopes and set up your own missions. And I did put a thread in the discussions board with the schedule of what I'd planned for the Canaries, where I'd sort of booked the missions for the Canaries in Chile. So it will give you some ideas anyway if you wanted to do a deep dive on Orion. And of course, you can always pop outside and have a look up. So to start, you don't want to look at a picture of me all night on this slate. I'm going to just start us where we were last week, actually. This wonderful picture by Rigel, which sort of inspired me so much and made me fall in love with Orion. So let me see, there we go. Which captures just the whole of Orion. You could also pop to the all-sky cam and you'll see Orion in the sky slightly to the right of our Canary Dome. So either of those work if you want to see Orion live in the flesh through the all-sky cam. You can do that. It's sort of middle right. In the all-sky cam, you can spot the belt, or you could just gaze at this wonderful mosaic by Rogelio Bonao. So we're going to start talking about last week we talked about Betelgeuse and Bellatrix, those two stars, the top of Orion. So the orange star and then the blue star, the shoulders of Orion, essentially, if we're thinking about Orion still as a hunter. But we're going to look at the bottom two stars. So Rigel is the star in the lower right hand corner. So if you're looking at the all sky camera, it would be effectively his left foot, but we're looking at him face on, so it would be the right lower foot for us looking at it. It's Orion's brightest star, even though it's the beta and Betelgeuse is the alpha, and it's part of the winter circle or the winter hexagon. So I'm sort of kicking myself because I put out a thread a few weeks ago saying, hey, what newbies want to join me, and we'll capture each one of the winter circle stars, and Rigel's one of them, and I haven't done it yet. Otherwise, I could be showing you my picture of Rigel, but we haven't. But if you want to join that challenge, please do. We've already seen Castor and Pollux, and Aldebaran, and then we have, say, Rigel and a couple of others, Sirius included, to sort of complete our hexagon. But Rigel, as I said, it isn't just one star, it's several stars. And it means, it's from the Arabic name left foot of the giant. And it's Rigel A is sort of the blue giant. And it's kind of blue-white as opposed to Betelgeuse's like russet. And in terms of sort of size and mass and stuff, it's about twice as hot and 40,000 times brighter than our sun is Rigel. And it's only 10 million years old compared to our sun's like 4.5 billion. And due to its sort of size and brightness, it, like Betelgeuse, is expected to end in a supernova one day. And whereas Betelgeuse was called, if you remember from last week, the announcer in the northern hemisphere, as it was the first star to pop up above the horizon announcing Orion's arrival, in the southern hemisphere that was Rigel's role. It just flipped on its head, and Rigel is sort of the brighter of one of those two lower stars, so it was kind of the announcer of the south, and it marked the new year for some of the Maori people of New Zealand. Some of the Maoris. Now, the Matariki, that's their name for the Pleiades, is typically what marks the new year for the Maori. It's a very important group of stars in New Zealand. It marks this new year in May, June. But some Maori people, like the Chatham, like on the Chatham Islands, it's actually the heliacal rising of Rigel that marks the new year. So a really important star that we kind of sort of don't think about in the northern hemisphere that much. In fact, I noticed it's not on Slooh 500, and hopefully it will be. Elsewhere in the southern hemisphere, so in the northern territories in Australia, to the Wardaman people, Rigel is seen as the red kangaroo leader called Unum Burgu, and the chief conductor of ceremonies in a songline when Orion is high in the sky. And the river Eridanus, if you sort of remember, we talked about this last week, it's the constellation of the river, thought to be the Nile or the Euphrates in our sort of typical Greek, Roman, Egyptian stories. The Rigel is resting on or in the river, depending on your story. So, but to the Wardaman people, the river was sort of leading to this ceremony. Was seen as leading to Rigel, to this kangaroo leader who was leading the ceremony, and all the other stars of Orion were like his tools and entourage, and Betelgeuse was just sort of one watching the ceremony. It was not even particularly important in the story to the Wardaman people. It was called Betelgeuse, by the way, was called is called Iarjungin, and it means owl's eyes flickering as they watch the ceremony. So Rigel's sort of like hosting this ceremony for the Wardaman people. And, there is, which one is better, do you think? Obviously, in this story, Betelgeuse sort of relegated just to watcher, and Rigel's the leader conducting it. And then some of the stories we talked about last week, it's Betelgeuse is the sort of leader of this group of stars. So which one do you think? which one do you like better? And I say this because there is some built-in rivalry between these two stars. And we're going to start with a tale from Japan about that. And it's actually it's a true story. So about 1,000 years ago, there were two rivaling clans in Japan. The Minamoto clan, also known as the Genji clan, and the Taira clan. So they're just sort of very powerful families. And they both wanted control over the imperial courts. And what the relevance of this rivalry is that the Minamoto chose Rigel with its white colour as their symbol. And the star is in fact called the Genji Boshi. While the Taira, or Heike clan as they're also called, adopted Betelgeuse and its red colour. And these colours flew on their banners. So the Minamoto flew the white banners and the Taira clan flew the red banners. So these two powerful families fought this legendary war in Japanese history between 1180 and 1185. It was called the Genpei War, and spurred because the Taira clan, so the Betelgeuse clan, put a 2-year-old on the throne. And the Minamoto clan thought that someone from their clan should have actually been on the throne instead of a 2-year-old. And so they started this big war, even though they've sort of been feuding for decades and decades. And so it was kind of seen also when people retell this tale that the stars are the clans facing each other and they're only kept apart by the belt. Well, it's not called the belt, they're kept apart by these stars in the middle. So this huge 5-year war began in Japan, and in the end the Taira clan, the Betelgeuse clan, lost. And it was actually the end then of the feudal state in Japan. It was a whole new era because it began the shogun era, and it was the rise to power of the warrior class, the samurai, and the gradual sort of suppression of power of the emperor as ruler, and he just sort of became a state figure really for the next 650 years, and then sort of reversed back. So I just love this, that we can look at these two stars, whether you're looking on the all-sky cam or at this image of Betelgeuse and Rigel as representative of these two feuding clans in Japan. It was true. And I don't know how true this is, but I am told that the reason the Japanese flag has white and red on it is to honour the colours of the Taira Minamoto standards. So wonderful. And sort of looking up at Orion, we are looking at, something that inspired, possibly, it's a good story anyway, that inspired the Japanese flag and inspired people to take them as their banners. So I just thought it was a really wonderful story. So while we're over Rigel, or our Genji Boshi Minamoto star, I thought it would be therefore appropriate to share with you an image of the Witch Head Nebula. Because if you're looking at the Rogelio Bonao picture, you'll see what I call a luck dragon, but it's the Witch Head Nebula, this sort of milky, well, it's a witch's face. Just to the right of Rigel, you probably you won't be able to see that on the all-sky cam, of course. So I'm going to share with you an image from one of our members. Peter I had this wonderful picture. Let me see if I can, there might be some overlap with the pictures, please forgive me. Oh, perfect, here we go. So this is the Witch Head Nebula, and member Peter I took this. So thank you very much to Peter for letting us share this evening. So as the name implies, this is a reflection nebula, but it looks sort of suspiciously like a crone, who would have plenty of stories of her own, actually. So, and she glows primarily by light reflected by Rigel, and the colour of this sort of very sort of bluish, greyish nebula is not only because of the bluish light of Rigel, but it's actually also because the dust grains reflect blue light more efficiently than they reflect red. So it's just a similar process, by the way, that causes our Earth's daytime sky to appear blue. But I love this nebula, and it does indeed look like a witch's face. This is sort of this isn't like the full nebula, so it's sort of hard to see the nose and the eyes and the chin in this one. But if we switch back to Rogelio's as well, you can sort of see the hat, the nose, and sort of the chin, maybe with some whiskers on, of the Witch Head Nebula. And but I see more of a luck dragon, and I wrote about that in Illuminations. If you're interested to see why I think it's a luck dragon. But thank you very much to Peter. It's great. So moving on to the other star, that's the foot. It's actually the right knee. It's of Orion, but we'd sort of look at it as maybe the right foot, or to us, looking at it this way, the left foot is the star Saiph, Saiph. And it's just not a star we're often familiar with. We don't often talk about it. But as I said, it's not a foot, it's a knee, and it's not even been given the right name. It's this poor old star. This star was, originally called the right knee of the giant in both Arabic and by the Romans, actually. But then the word Saiph, which means sword, got adopted, and this was by the people naming the stars. Much later on, much long after it was named in Arabic and in Latin. So Saiph was actually sort of, as I say, meant sword, and it was actually the name of a star that was in between Rigel and Mintaka, the highest, in the northern hemisphere, the highest star in the belt, the one on the right. So it wasn't even supposed to be for this star. But that's what it ended up getting. It ended up being called the sword, even though it's not the sword. We're going to come to the sword a bit later. And Saiph is about 700 light years away, and it's sort of the same as Rigel. And it looks fainter just because it's a much higher temperature, so it causes the star to radiate much of its light in the invisible ultraviolet. But it's actually a very sort of, it's a very bright, or it's not bright, but it's sort of as powerful a star as the rest of them, with just sort of this sadly misnaming, confusing, and largely forgotten that this is even there. So good to know when you're looking up that you've got Betelgeuse, Bellatrix as the shoulders, if you're thinking about Orion as the hunter, and then Rigel and Saiph as the knee, leg, foot. But Saiph, Rigel, and the belt, Orion's belt, actually have their very own story, and it's a Mayan story. And this sort of triangle that was formed between Saiph, Rigel, and Orion's belt were hugely important to the Mayans, whose sort of civilization began, and we think about 4,000 years ago, because they were seen as sort of a three, as a triangle, with the belt sort of being a laid down object. They were seen as the three hearthstones of creation. So the Mayan creation story is that three stones were placed in the world, and that led to creation. And there's some text, sort of like glyphs etched into stone, that tell this story, and they explain that the first hearthstone was planted by Jaguar Paddler and his brother Stingray Spine Paddler. What wonderful names. And they are known to be also responsible, these two brothers, for paddling the canoe, something that's going to come in a bit later, paddling the canoe which carries the dead across the rivers of the underworld. And they planted a stone called the Jaguar Throne. And then following them, other animal and spirit gods too planted Snake Throne and Water Throne. Another name for Water Throne was Laying Down, and that's thought to be Orion's belt, this idea of the stone laying down. And once these three were planted, then all of sort of life as we know it began. And the planting of the stones is also the ritual for building a home to the Mayan tradition. So when you come to build a home as a Mayan, you put down these three pillars. We often think about putting down four, but Mayan tradition, you put down three, and it's sort of like the building of a hearth at the heart of the home using these three large stones. So some interpretations of other texts found engraved in stones suggest that these three stones in the sky, these hearthstones in the sky, are symbolic of the preparation of the world for a new human existence. So like the foundation of the world. And then some go a bit further in their interpretation and saying that it was a preparation of a new human existence, possibly after a great flood. So I know we've talked about this before, that there is this it's deep ingrained as like a myth theme in humanity, that there was this great deluge that wiped out civilizations, and then it was sort of humans sort of started again, basically. And you'll find that in ancient Greek stories. You obviously find it in the Bible, and here we again see it echoed by the Mayans, that these sort of say 3 stones, Safe, Rigel and Orion's Belt, became the foundation after that deluge. And there are other Mayan texts that sort of speak of the wooden people being killed in a flood and their hearthstones spilling out across the sky. So it could well be, but it is a bit sort of conjecture. Maybe these, maybe Safe, Rigel and Orion's Belt aren't referring to these hearthstones. It's just what some people have suggested. Other people have suggested Castor and Pollux, and another star might have formed the hearthstones. But I think it's a really beautiful story anyway to think about, and another sort of example of where these myths tend to sort of overlap across oceans, really. And this kind of leads us, this story of creation, into the Orion cloud complex. So this Rogelio Bernal Andreu picture, which I promise you we will get off of it in a second, is to me so beautiful because it shows so fully the cloud complex. I mean, you can just sort of see all the nebulae and the reds and the blues, and the Witch's Head Nebula, and you can also see in the sword the Orion Nebula, which we'll take a closer look at in a moment. And sort of in between the belt and Rigel and Safe, as I say, you'll see the Orion Nebula, this sort of smoky, it looks a bit red in here, but the sort of smokiness of what is a sword. And if you're looking at the all-sky camera, you probably get a better view of this, because you'll see the sword hanging and it just kind of looks a bit like a blur. And in fact, I popped out last night and had to look up and was trying to see if I could really get some clarity on the sword, but it does kind of just look blurry because obviously it's the nebula that's there. And with binoculars you can see much clearer, but obviously our earlier ancestors didn't have binoculars. So it would have just appeared kind of sort of smoky, cloudy perhaps. So what some people say about this Mayan story is that this smokiness in the sort of middle of these hearthstones was actually the cosmic fire that was it was a cosmic fire of creation, and that once this sparked, the smoke that came off it sort of kept the foundations of these 3 points steady. So it's a little bit of a leap, but this metaphor of this cosmic fire of creation is really apt for the Orion Nebula, that middle bit in the sword, which we're going to take a look at in a moment, because the Orion Nebula is like an enormous cloud of dust and gas where vast numbers of new stars are being forged. In fact, the whole of Orion's cloud complex, I mean, so many stars are being birthed in there. It's just phenomenal, which is why, again, I just love this picture. But I say I don't want to stay on this picture all night. So I'm going to switch to Dave M has a great picture of M42 that I want to share with you, if I can. There we go. Sorry about that. And look at the colours. I mean, it's something that Orion's Nebula, and here we sort of almost feel that it's this fire, smoky fire of creation in these hearthstones of the Mayans. I mean, it's just beautiful. This sort of green and red. And there are so many images of this Great Orion Nebula of M42 out there, and I encourage you to sort of Google and have a look. I mean, it's just amazing, but this one to me is just absolutely stunning, captured by Dave M. So a couple of things I wanted to tell you about this nebula. So it was discovered in 1610, and it's massive. It's 24 light years across. And to look at it, you see it sort of small and smoky in the sword when you look up with your naked eyes in the sky, but it's 24 light years across, and it's about 1,300 light years away from us. So talking some really big numbers with Orion generally, but also with this nebula. In fact, like the cloud complex of in Orion, it's like hundreds and hundreds of light years across. It's just enormous. So here we are in this beautiful nebula, and you can get some. I mean, this is done with Slooh, as you can see the watermark and below. And sometimes I can't remember if this one is a mosaic. It's probably I'm guessing it's a mosaic. Because it's such a big nebula, but you can book missions and certainly see if you can capture this yourself with Slooh's telescopes, and it's well worth it. It's you can see it because you can see it with binoculars, and it's so visible. It's the best known nebula, really, although it's not the catchiest name. The Great Orion Nebula it says what it is. So the Orion Nebula is it contains a very young open cluster known as the Trapezium, due to sort of the asterism of its primary 4 stars, and actually 2 of these can be resolved if you really look closely and have a good night to see them. So you can see it's actually 6 stars. So I wanted to pop to Dave L's image here. It feels weird calling people by their last letter, but hopefully no one minds. So here we go. Right, there we go. This is Dave L's image. So you can see the trapezium a little clearer here, those bright stars. And they are still in their early years, these stars. And in fact, the trapezium is a component of a much larger cluster, thought to be about 2,800 stars actually, and just the trapezium has a diameter of 20 light years. And one of the things I love about the trapezium is that it was discovered, or the first stars were discovered by none other than Galileo. So really, and who doesn't love to look up and see Galileo up there in the sky? It's coming back at them. So I just really just love the Orion Nebula. So I wanted to sort of leave this up and share another story. So it's not very often that we have stories specifically about Orion's the Orion Nebula. We kind of know about the sword. There's some stories, Northern Hemisphere stories about Orion's sword, but the detail of this particular nebula don't really sort of make it into stories. However, there is a story specific to this from the Blackfoot peoples, and according to author Dorcas Miller, that's because this nebula was known as the smoking star to the Blackfoot people. So they didn't recognize it as a nebula. So they were just looking up at it, didn't have binoculars when they named it. Looked like a grey and hazy sort of star, sort of hazy mass around a star. So it's called the smoking star. And there's a wonderful story of how it came to be in the sky. And it goes a little something like this, according to Miller. And I've kind of shortened her story a little for tonight. But she has a wonderful book called Stars of the First People, that if you are interested in Native American constellation star stories, I highly recommend, because so much detail. So the story goes that a young man married the 3 daughters of an old husband and wife. And although the old man helped his son-in-law hunt buffalo every day, the young man refused to give the old couple any meat. But the youngest wife would steal meat to give them secretly. And one day when the old man was walking, he found a blood clot. It's bizarre, yeah. He found a blood clot on the path and took it home to his wife to make soup with. They were very hungry. And when the wife was making the soup, she heard a baby crying. And sure enough, there in the soup pot was a baby. So that night, the baby asked the old man to lift it up and touch its head to each of the lodge poles in their tent. And as he touched one by one, the baby grew in size until he became a strong man. And he called himself Bloodclot. So next morning, when the son-in-law came to drag the old man off to hunt, Bloodclot kills the son-in-law. And then he goes on to kill the older daughters who had not helped their parents out. So kind of gruesome, and maybe sort of some of the red we're seeing here in this beautiful picture as blood is spilled. And then Bloodclot leaves and says, I'm off. I need to save the world. And he travels the continent righting wrongs. He's an absolute hero. He kills harmful beasts, except any pregnant animals, which he spares. So kind of a lesson is being taught to people hearing this story. And he bumps off a bunch of evil people. There are evil women, and he tricks them, and they die. And finally, after he's rid the world of monsters, Bloodclot returns to the old couple and tells them that he has to go back to the sky, where he will become the smoking star. And sure enough, some crow people come along and kill him. And as he leaves his body, the smoking star, or the Great Orion Nebula M42, appears in the night sky. So an unusual story, but a story about this nebula nonetheless that I think is just perfect. Now we're looking at it from this light where it's sort of, grey and reddy and bloody but smoky. And sometimes the nebula is also seen as the light that sparks off the stone knife that Bloodclot holds and kills people with, which echoes a little the story of the Greeks and Romans, who, as they see the nebula as being sort of part of Orion's sword. They don't talk about the nebula per se, but they as I say, they see it as a sword. Okay. So, as I mentioned, astronomers, now realize that the Orion Nebula is part of this much, much larger Orion molecular cloud complex. And across the whole thing, stars are being born. And really, to me, this is what makes Orion such a special constellation. You could just spend such a long time delving into each of its objects. I mean, we're touching probably on, 20 or so over these past 2 weeks, but you could spend months just picking out small clusters and other nebulae, and then just diving into these huge nebulae. So it's such a juicy constellation, not to mention all the stories around Orion. And there is another emission nebula that is very big and well known, and so I'm just going to jump back to our Rigel picture for a moment, really just for a moment, in case you're getting sick of this picture, which I don't know how you could get sick of, but because I want you to take a look at Barnards Loop. So Barnards Loop is this beautiful, almost like a crescent moon on the left-hand side. This lovely red loop, like a semicircle. That's around there, and I wanted to show you that because I wanted to show you my version that I took this week. So 1 second while I do that, and I'm just getting buzzed by the studio. So I just want to check something on the studio. Oh no, all good. Okay, we're all good. Great. So this is my version of Barnards Loop. I was so excited. It is Sharpless 276, and I put this in Canary 2 for a mission. Having seen Rogelio Bernal as Andrea's picture, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to get to zoom in on Barnards Loop and see it, which was, I am very, very amateur, so it was very naive of me not to realise that I wasn't going to see it. But Sharpless 276, or Barnards Loop, or this particular area I've zoomed into here, is the brightest region of the loop. So I kind of expected a lot more from this, but I'm in very, very good company, I discovered. So I wanted to show you a bit of the background of Barnards Loop that Stephen James O'Meara, in one of his wonderful books, talks about, and made me feel so much better. So Barnards Loop has always been like a point of debate, including its very name. So the first thing I should tell you is that you really don't get to see that amazing kind of red wing, that red crescent of the loop, unless it's a wide field, long exposure, really in red light. And Barnard in 1894 took some wide field exposures of Orion, and his intention was to capture the whole constellation. Imagine that. And it was in those shots that he noticed this great curved nebula. He'd never seen it before because he'd never done this wide field long exposure, sorry. So he sees it, he gets very excited. It's called Barnards Loop. What he doesn't realise is that William Henry Pickering, Harvard's William Henry Pickering, had already imaged it 5 years earlier. But he acknowledged it, but it was still kept his name. But because of this need for the long and wide field exposure, not everyone was convinced it was even there, and many photographers later on did what I did, pointed their cameras up, took pictures, and came back and said, well, this is nonsense. Like, look at it. It's just it's a bunch of very lovely stars, thank you very much, but I'm not seeing this amazing red loop. So that went back and forth for a while, this really big debate about whether it was just made up or not. So I don't feel too bad. I feel like I'm in good company with it. It's been argued for a long time. So this would be Barnards Loop, and just a warning that if you set a mission to Sharpless 276 on Canary 2, and don't be shocked if this is what you get and you don't get that amazing red semicircle. And I know that some of the members are talking about doing a mosaic of Barnards Loop, and indeed maybe drilling down into the belt and sword. So if you're into that, then please hop on the discussions board and talk to some folks about how to get involved. So maybe to a more interesting picture now, we're going to move to M43. Let me see. Here we go. This is mine. I did take it. I took this. I was much happier with this shot, as I'm sure you can imagine. So this is de Myron's Nebula, or 1982, NGC 1982. And it was discovered by Jean-Jacques Dortu de Moran before 1731. So that's why it's kind of known as de Moran's Nebula. Although, to be fair, it really is known as M43. So poor old de Moran didn't really get a good claim. And it's part of the Greater Orion Nebula, but it's separated from the main nebula by a lane of dust. So it sort of becomes, a photographer's dream in its own right, M43, and you can sort of see how beautiful it is. And this was, just a quick pick from Canary 2 earlier this week. But there's something else fairly interesting about there's lots of interesting things about these wonderful nebulae. But just above M43, or just below, if you're in the southern hemisphere, and I haven't forgotten the southern hemisphere, we'll get to some more stories in a moment, is another wonderful nebulae, one that we know pretty well, and that is the Running Man. So here we go. You can see here, and this is another wonderful picture from Peter I. That's the Running Man. And if I've deliberately hidden it, but I'm saying that, if I manage to, move him up, am I going to be able to? No. Okay. if I move him up, you'd be able to see M43 under him. So we'll see if I can do that as I'm talking. So I thought it'd be fun to ask people on Twitter. I'm fairly new to Twitter, so I'm sort of having a bit of fun with it this week. About, what do you think the running man is running from? Obviously with the idea of showing you that he was just above M43, so I was going to say he's running from M43. But he's, by the way, he's 1,500 light years away, again in the sword. So you've got this wonderful M42, M43, and the running man in the sword of Orion. Can you imagine just all that hidden there? But I asked people, as I said, what do you think he's running from? And Duncan suggested he may have been running from 2017. It was a bad year for some. So maybe he's doing a runner. Is he running from the lunar eclipse blue full moon that we're going to have in a couple of weeks here on Slooh and in the world? But we'll be talking about it here on Slooh. Willis suggests he's running from the hunter. So it's kind of this tragic story of this poor running man trying to escape the hunter, but he's part of the hunter, so he'll never escape. John suggests he's not running from anything, but he's actually running after a chicken that went way beyond the road it crossed, and admits if he could have found some sort of chicken cluster, that would have been a better theory. So, some sort of cosmic chicken. My suggestion, piggybacking on John's, is that he's doing the supermarket sweep. Because the shopping cart cluster is not too far away within the Orion constellation. And that was one of the hidden treasures I wanted to show you tonight, actually, and booked chili for, but humidity was there, so I can't show you, but that might be fun to book a mission to the shopping cart cluster. So or is he, and I was kind of hoping someone would say this, is he perhaps running from a shark? And this is really my pathetic attempt to kind of move us into the final part of tonight, looking at how Orion in the southern hemisphere, and not just the southern hemisphere as we'll talk about, was seen in so many stories as having something to do or being part of a story about a boat or a canoe with 3 men in it. Typically those 3 men were Orion's Belt. So I want to jump to Orion from the belt down, and this is a picture from Dave L. Here we go. Oh, because I moved everything. Right, look at this, fantastic. So you have to kind of put your head on the side, which is, maybe this is the fairest as we're talking about northern and southern hemisphere. So obviously the 3 stars on the left are Orion's Belt. And you can see just under our Nitak, that's the lowest star in this picture of Orion's Belt, you will see the Flame Nebula above it, and the Horsehead Nebula under it. And then coming down from the middle, from Aunalam, you'll see the Sword. So you'll see the first nebula we come across on the right is the Running Man. And then we've got M43 and M42. And you can just catch a bit of trapezium, I think, there on the edge. So I thought I would leave this up so you can kind of capture this whole, the belt and the sword together as we talk through some of these wonderful stories of the Southern Hemisphere. Okay. So one of the first ones I wanted to tell you was about the people of Kiribati. So we kind of forget this, but 70% of the world is covered of our planet is covered in water. We call it planet Earth, but really it's like planet water, planet ocean. We forget, and something like 80% of all life is in water. It's not on land, it's in water of some sort. Majority is in the oceans, but also the lakes. We just forget. So to a lot of, especially when we talk about Northern Hemisphere stories and the Greeks and the Romans and we think more about buildings, but to a lot of the world, we're living on small islands near the sea, and so stories were more about fishing. So to the people in Kiribati, which is a tiny island, which a colleague of mine I I write about environmental finance sometimes, and my colleague there, he went to Kiribati this year, and it's literally like a meter above the sea level. And he went there to talk about climate change because, there's going to be no island left, and a lot of these Pacific Islands, South Pacific Islands, won't be there if water levels rise. But just like a kind of stunning but very raw and kind of brutal place right now because of the situation with the environment. But to them, the sky is the ocean, which I just think is so beautiful. And you can imagine if it's like a still night and you see sort of twinkling on the tops of the waves, maybe of the moonlight or something, it appears like the sky, or you look up at the sky and it seems to reflect the sea, because that's kind of what you know. So as I say, to them the sky was the ocean. So there are lots of star patterns, asterisms and constellations for people of Kiribati that refer to sea creatures. So there's like a sea snail and a whale, a string of shells. But Orion's Belt was known as Inai and Intua, or is known as Inai and Intua, which means a string of parrotfish. And when these stars are seen in the sky, then the Inai, the parrotfish, are supposed to be plentiful in the sea. So it's sort of beautiful to imagine these 3 stars that we're looking at right now of Orion's Belt being parrotfish. And then the sword is seen by the people of Kiribati as a shark that is going to eat the parrotfish. So that was kind of my try to link in the running man running from a shark into this segment. But it wasn't just people of Kiribati that sort of saw the waters in Orion. So to the Yolngu peoples, and this is, thank you Keith Smith for sending me this, it's very kind of you, this story. The Yolngu live on the water in the Northern Territories of Australia, and so they have a story that 3 young boys are out fishing and all they can catch are kingfish. So one got so hungry he ate one of the kingfish. You're not supposed to eat the kingfish. And the sun was so angry, the sun in the sky, that she created a water spout that blew them up into the sky as a warning to children everywhere that you have to obey tribal laws. So the 3 stars we see in Orion's Belt are actually these 3 brothers. And then what we would call the hand of Orion and the feet, actually that's the front and end of the canoe. And there's a lot of other stories about these 3 in a canoe, which a couple more we'll share in a minute. But the canoe is like a much larger constellation. It goes out into normally to the constellations that touch other side of Orion, and these 3 stars are the 3 people in the boat. And to the Yolngu, the Orion Nebula were seen as fish, so not a shark like the Kiribati, but these were seen as fish. So I kind of love that, like life began in the ocean and then life's beginning in these star nurseries in the Orion Nebula. So kind of see that there. So a couple more stories. So it's, one of the things is we can share more stories. We can't look through the telescope, sadly, but we have time for more stories, I suppose. So I wanted to share a story with you from Tonga. Okay. And this is from, it's a really great book, The Great Canoes in the Sky. And it's sort of star lore of the South Pacific. It's by Stephen Robert Chadwick and Martin Pavia Smith. And there are many, many stories and they're wonderful. But there's 2 I wanted to share with you. And this first one says from Tonga. And also involves a shark. So the story goes that Hina lived long ago with her parents and her 3 brothers. And one day, while out fishing, the boys and their father caught a baby shark. Her father, Mangakalau, who doted on his only daughter, suggested that they shouldn't kill it, but they'll give it to Hina as a pet. So they built a pool in the reef by blocking off all the channels and left the shark to swim there and for Hina to come and feed it. Soon Hina spent all her time at the water's edge, talking and playing with her shark. Some say it got so tame she could stroke its head. All was going well, the shark was growing big and Hina was growing ever fonder of her pet. But unfortunately in the tropics, violent storms are to be expected from time to time, and a storm unleashed its fury over the island that Hina and her family lived on. And while they kept themselves safe away from the shore, the reef could not withstand the pounding waves which tore apart the coral. Nobody can be sure if the shark embraced its freedom like Free Willy, or was simply thrust over the reef by the violent waves. But Hina was inconsolable. She begged her parents to get out of the canoe and get out on the canoe and go and look for her pet. Her father could not resist, and he and his wife Tamatangikai and Hina, the three of them, boarded their canoe and sailed out into the open waters, which were only really just beginning to calm. They paddled here and there while Hina called to her shark, but there was nothing but silence. Finally, a fin surfaced from the deep, and she recognized it at once. Some suggest that the shark told Hina he didn't want to return to the coral pool after the joys of experiencing the open water, and some say he just dived towards the deep, and Hina, who could not bear to be parted from him, jumped in afterward. She jumps over and turns herself into a rock, which is said to then provide shelter from the churning waves in times of storm for all the sharks, so that they can hide below. Tamatangikai and Maungakaloa could not be parted from their daughter and threw themselves out into the sea too. Their boat rose into the heavens and became Alotolo, 3 in a boat, which is the belt of Orion. And nearby, in Tungakai, you'll find a string of fish, and that is the sword of Orion. So a really sweet story. And then he goes on, the authors go on to say that actually it sort of has a deeper meaning, because the fishermen of Tonga do go out and fish for sharks. I don't know if they still do, but when this book was written, they do. And they call, like Hina called to her shark, they call out, there's a whole ritual around. They bring the shark into the boat, and the shark is seen as Hina herself, like the goddess of the shark, and they cover the shark with flowers, and it's sort of they try and avoid injury and try not to sort of bring too much pain to the shark. So that's one story. And then the other story, and I shared this a little earlier on social media, has to do with these 3 stars of Orion's Belt being, again, brothers in a boat that actually have part of a creation story, because they fished up the islands of the South Pacific, and you can go across Polynesia and you'll see the same story repeated over and over again about these stars. And it's about this sort of one trickster god and his brothers. And in fact, Maui in Hawaii is named after this trickster god. Now, he's known as Maui in some places. He's known as Motiki Tiki in others, Mau Tiki Tiki in others. I'm going to share one story. It's about the island of Anuta. It's in the Solomon Islands. So this trickster god is Mo Tiki Tiki is his name in Anuta, and his brothers Pomatua and Porangomia, they build a canoe and they go on a fishing expedition. And out on the open sea, Mo Tiki Tiki casts his line and feels something bite on it, and he asks his brothers to guess what kind of fish he's going to reel in. And Pomatua guesses a scaleless tuna, and he's right. So Mo Tiki Tiki throws his line back over and gets another bite. And as he begins to haul it in, he says to his brothers, "Guess what I've caught?" "And a snapper," says Pomatua, which is once again correct. And he throws his line over again, and he says, as he begins to tell, "Guess again." And Pomatua says, "I know what you've caught, a trevally." And so with these 3 fish in their canoe, they return to shore and share their catch with their parents. When morning comes, Motiki Tiki tells his father that the three brothers would return to the ocean, saying that they will not be coming back. Out on the ocean, Motiki Tiki throws his line overboard, allowing it to sink far into the depths. It doesn't take long for something to bite. "Guess my fish," he calls to his brothers. Paumatua looks at Motiki Tiki straining and sweating as he pulls in the line and says it must be a shark. And Paumatua, as they all look overboard, Motiki Tiki pulls and pulls, and eventually the fish surfaces, breaking the water. But this is no fish, it is an island. It is the island of Anuta. The island, though, was stained red, the colour of blood, which was not a good omen, so the three brothers flipped to the island and saw the other side was much more pleasant, and leave it like that. Then they moved on to another place, and Motiki Tiki starts fishing again. This time Paumatua is sure it's a shark, but when his brother pulls the fish to the surface, it's yet another island. This happens again and again until Paumatua says, "I want to pull up an island," and he grabs the magic fishing rope. Well, Motiki Tiki loses his temper because it's his line and he's the fisher of the islands. And to punish his brother, he cuts the outrigger from the canoe and they drift into the water. And buffeted by waves, they lift into the sky. And Motiki Tiki and his two brothers become the stars Ara Toru, the 3 stars of Orion's Belt. So another beautiful story. And this story is, as I say, repeated over and over and over in all different cultures and different islands throughout Polynesia. Maybe just a different name of the trickster god, but always that they end up pulling up the islands and the brothers are in Orion's Belt. So almost, it's a creation story, really. It's sort of interesting how, it's such a unique constellation because of these 3 stars together that it's tied to creation stories across the world. Okay, so we're coming to sort of the end now, but I didn't want to miss. I missed this last week. It was so we're sort of wrapping up and leaving below the belt and coming back up to beautiful Orion's face, and that is because Mario took a wonderful picture of the Monkey Head Nebula, which is not far from Orion's face. So I wanted to show this if I can. There we go. And I've looked at several pictures of the Monkey Head Nebula and I cannot see a monkey head. So I'd love someone to tell me where that is. I cannot see it. But I wanted to show you this. It's an emission nebula and this is a whopping 6,400 light years from Earth. Unbelievable. And it can be seen in binoculars. So well worth having a look. It's NGC 2174 if you wanted to get a map and look it up. And that kind of leads us to our last story. So with now back in the northern hemisphere, looking at the head of Orion, which would really be down somewhere in the bottom of Orion in the southern hemisphere, and away from these warm, balmy waters of Polynesia, and instead back to sort of frigid temperatures of North America. Because I just wanted to share this final story, the story of the Ojibwe people, who live kind of North America, South Canada. Their Orion is known as Wintermaker. And I'll show you a picture in a minute, but I just kind of want to leave up the Monkey Head Nebula for a little while. So Wintermaker is, he arrives in the sky around December. And Wintermaker he essentially looks like Orion, but his arms outstretch across the whole entire sky instead of reaching up for a club and out for a shield. So he holds Procyon on the left and Aldebaran on the right. Otherwise he looks just like Orion does, and he has, instead of a belt, it's called a sash. What he does is he holds the whole Earth in an icy grip. And actually on North Hegeman Lake in Minnesota, there is a lovely pictogram thought to be maybe a couple of hundred years old, of this odd-shaped man without arms outstretched, and it's Wintermaker. And he's sort of like he's again a trickster god, Wintermaker, like Mautiki Tiki and Maui. meaning that, and one of the reasons a lot of cultures have trickster gods is try to sort of keep us from being serious about and sort of making deities objects of worship. So often Wintermaker doesn't want to leave. And to the Ojibwe people, his cold spell is really welcomed because it's seen as a time to be with family and to retreat to calm. Let me see if I can get him up. Oh, okay. Sort of practically speaking, when Wintermaker's in the sky, all the sort of spoils of fall hunting are easier to freeze. And also the swamps are easier to cross. The rivers can be crossed, the lakes can be crossed. So winter is not seen as a terribly bad time when Wintermaker's around. However, come April, people have had enough of Wintermaker. The Ojibwe have had enough. And Carl Goldboy, who's an Ojibwe artist and astronomer, sort of shared with me that come April, when people have had enough of Wintermaker, families take their children out in the meadows with bows and arrows and aim their arrows up to the sky and try and shoot Wintermaker down. And once that happens and the frogs wake up, no more winter stories are allowed to be told until he appears the very next year. So I wanted to leave you with that. And if you, I've just noticed I didn't put a picture of Wintermaker in my deck, but if you look on our Facebook page, if you look on Illuminations, and if you are on Twitter, I have put some Carl Goldboy's interpretation of Wintermaker as a constellation, and also some pictures of that pictogram at Hegman Lake. So I think we'll return to where we were. One last look at our Rogelio Banal picture as we wrap up here. Here we go. It's really been inspiring me the last few weeks, so I'm thrilled to end it here. So yes, it's time to snuff out the fire for the night and end our stories and head to bed, or maybe it's dawn where you are. But really do go out and have a look at Orion if you can this winter, because it's such a treasure. I mean, looking at this now, all these wonderful things that are within it, and some of them we can see with our naked eye, and some with binoculars, just with binoculars. But of course, you can come on Slooh and book a mission and get a bit closer up and take some of these amazing pictures that we've seen our members take tonight, and join our discussion board and share them, maybe start a mosaic going. I'm going to be back next week. I'm still waiting to see which constellation is going to be best seen this time at night, so I have a few in mind, but I just want to check that on both scopes, Chile and Canary Islands, that we'll be able to see them. Sort of thinking about Cancer, maybe Perseus, we'll see. If you've got any in mind, or you've got any ideas, just you can shoot me an email or just start a thread on the discussion board. I'm Helen@slooh.com. Wednesday, Dr. Paige Godfrey is back from her adventures at the conference, and she'll be continuing with her Intro to Astronomy series. I mistakenly said last week that it was going to be on Wednesday, but it's actually going to be this Wednesday coming. So you can check that out on the livecast page. And hopefully Paul Cox will be back to health and back with us next Sunday. And then, of course, we've got our full moon, blue moon, lunar eclipse coming up that we'll hopefully all be together with. And then in between all that, we've had our eclipse writing content that's posted. And so please go and vote for your favourites, and you can find out more about that on the homepage. And then in Illuminations, you'll find a few of the things we've talked about tonight. I tend to put a few posts up every week about the constellations we're going to talk about. So that's it from me. Thanks for coming with me this evening. I know without the telescopes, it's not always quite as fun, but I hope you've enjoyed looking at the members' photos with me and just seeing some of the wonderful things we can capture through Slooh's telescopes. And I wish you clear skies from me in the northeast, still under the grip of Wintermaker, and a very good night.